Okay, guys, what's up? So we're gonna start from lesson two. I decided to actually set it up so it can read. Uh, Again, I'm messing with my own types of study method and figuring things out so I can get through it. I have a lot of my own different struggles, hence the slight inconsistency, and I need to work on that absolutely. Not even slight. But anyway, let's get to it, guys.
Lesson 2 Introduction and Objectives. Lesson 2 Installing System Devices. Lesson Introduction. The market for the system components of a personal computer is a complex one. Processors, memory modules, disk drives, and power supplies are advertised with a bewildering range of technology improvements and performance differentiators. As a CompTIA A Plus technician, you need to interpret these performance characteristics and understand how processing, storage, and power components contribute to a PC specification that is appropriate for a given usage scenario. You must be able to resolve compatibility issues and be confident about the manual installation and removal procedures for these often expensive and delicate devices. Lesson Objectives. In this lesson, you will install and configure power supplies and cooling. Select and install storage devices. Install and configure system memory. Install and configure CPUs. CPUs. Welcome to CertMaster Learn. Introduction. Install and configure power supplies and cooling. Topic 2A. Install and configure power supplies and cooling. Core 1 exam objectives covered. 3.4 Given a scenario, install and configure motherboards, central processing units, CPUs, and add-on cards. 3.5 Given a scenario, install or replace the appropriate power supply. Understanding the power requirements of all the components and the maximum power output is crucial in managing new builds, upgrades, and repairs. Along with power, all PC components generate heat. Managing heat by installing and maintaining cooling systems makes for a more reliable computing environment. A computer that runs too hot risks damaging its own components and is likely to run at reduced performance levels. Note: instructor will not always be shown wearing an ESD wrist strap during this task.
Now, from what I know, as far as my own knowledge, one way to actually bypass having to use a wrist strap is by touching the inside of the tower. That that then I hope I'm trying to explain it properly. Uh, you ground yourself basically. So
How to install a power supply unit? Let's start by first removing a PSU. Now we've prepared the case to work inside of it. We're going to go ahead and we'll remove our case cover and we'll set this to the side. We're going to verify, which we have, remove the power cable from the back of the system unit. And then what we're going to do is disconnect the power supply connector, the main power supply connector on the motherboard itself. We're going to remove the the serial ATA cables, and we will pull them to the side. We're also going to remove the CPU power connector as well. We'll go ahead and do that. And we will pull these to the side. If you have other power cables that are down here in the bottom, we can just pull these out as well, being mindful not to damage any of the internal components. The other thing that you might want to do is remove any devices or any adapter cards that might be in the way. This is a bottom mount power supply unit, so our graphics adapter I had to go ahead and remove before we would be able to slide this out. To remove this power supply, first we have to snap off the front face of the case. Next, we have to stand the system unit on its side. The next step is to loosen up the 4 bolts that are mounting the power supply unit to the system case or chassis. So we'll go ahead and we will remove these. Now I will keep one in the system unit just so the power supply doesn't fall out of the back of the case, and we will set this back down on its side and remove that last bolt for the next step. Once the remaining screw has been removed from the chassis, now all we're going to do is slide the power supply out of the bay that it is set in, being mindful not to damage any of the components that are on the motherboard, and we will remove the power supply. To install a PSU or power supply unit, first you have to remove the old one, as you can see we have already done in this case. Next, you identify the drive bay. In this case, it is a lower or bottom mount power supply unit. And then you will slide the power supply into the bay, being mindful of anything, any obstructions that might be in your way. Make sure that you do not damage any of the components that are attached to the motherboard. At this point, what we're going to do is we're going to put the very first screw into the back of the case to mount and at least position the power supply so that we can put the remaining screws on the chassis. Once you've got the first screw threaded, you now have the other 3 screws lined up and that you can screw in the remaining mounting points, whether they be, in this case, these are screw points. They could also be bolts as well, or a combination of the two. We will put the remaining screws in and tighten them down. We will make sure that if it has an input selector switch for 110 or 220, depending on where you're at, if you're here in the United States, you want to put it on the 110 setting. If you're in the European countries, you're going to want to put it on the 220. And this one actually has an internal power connector that routes its way to the back of the case where we plug in the main power connector. So we're going to go ahead and plug this in, and there's no electrical current running through the machine at all because the main power connector on the back has been disconnected. Now what we need to do is turn the computer back on its side and we'll start connecting the cables. When connecting your cables, you want to pay attention to your 20 plus 4 pin or your solid 24-pin connector and connect it to the motherboard's main power connector. Also keep in mind that your CPUs need power as well, so either your 4 or your 8-pin connector for your CPU. You also have your hard drive connectors that you need to worry about as well. Keep in mind you have your 15-pin serial ATA connectors, and these can go on the hard drives as well as the optical drive likewise. There are also other connectors here too. Your Molex connector for any system fans or case or chassis fans that you might need to connect. Keep in mind those too. We're going to go ahead and connect our cables and move into the next step. Now that the connections are back, you can see we have our PCIe power connector and our PCIe adapter. We've got our main 24-pin power connector as well as our 8-pin CPU connector and the serial ATA power connectors connected back to the motherboard. One of the last things that we have to do is just replace the system case cover. And once that is done, we can go ahead and we can then plug in our main power connector on the back. And then the last thing to do is just to restart your PC.
Power supply units. Power supply units. The power supply unit PSU delivers direct current DC, low voltage power to the PC components. A PSU contains a rectifier to convert alternating current, AC, building power to DC voltage output, transformers to step down to lower voltages, and filters and regulators to ensure consistent output voltage levels. The other important component in the PSU is the fan, which dissipates the heat generated. The power supply's size and shape determine its compatibility with the system case, in terms of available room plus screw and fan locations. The form factor also determines compatibility with the motherboard, in terms of power connectors. Most PSUs designed for use with desktop PCs are based on the ATX form factor. A PSU is plugged into an electrical outlet using a suitable power cord. Before doing this, you must ensure that the PSU is compatible with the input voltage from the outlet. A PSU designed only for use in North America, where the input voltage for most homes and offices is 120 VEC, low line, will not work in the UK, where the voltage is 230 VEC, high line. Also, facilities such as data centers typically use high line voltage because it is more efficient. Most PSUs are dual voltage and are auto switching. Some have a manual switch to select the correct voltage. Fixed voltage types can only accept either low line or high line. The input operating voltages should be clearly marked on the unit and accompanying documentation. AC voltage supply varies by country and by the nature of AC distribution circuits. Consequently, PSUs have quite a wide tolerance in each band. The low line range is 100 to 127 VEC, while the high line range is 220 to 240 VEC. Auto switching PSU. Image copyright 123. Wattage rating. Power is the rate at which things generate or use energy. Power is measured in watts, W, calculated for electrical components as voltage multiplied by current, V*I. A PSU must be able to meet the combined power requirements of the PC's components. The PSU's output capability is measured as its wattage rating. A PSU designed for use in a standard desktop PC is typically rated at around 200 to 300 W. Enterprise workstation PCs and servers often have units rated over 300 W to meet the demands of multiple CPUs, additional memory modules, disk drives, and tape units. Gaming PCs might require 500 W or better power supplies to cope with the high-specification CPU and graphics cards. The power requirement of different components varies widely. For example, CPUs can range from 17 W to over 100 W, depending on the model. If you are building or upgrading a system, the simplest way to work out the power requirement is to use an online calculator. The power output is not the same as the power the PSU draws from grid power. If a PSU works at around 75% efficiency, a 300 W supply would draw 400 W from the outlet. The extra energy is lost mainly as heat. As energy becomes more expensive both in terms of cost and in terms of the climate, power efficiency is an important criterion to use when selecting a PSU. An Energy Star 80 Plus compliant PSU must be 80% efficient at 20 to 100% of load. When specifying a PSU for a system with high power requirements, it is also important to assess the power distribution for its output voltages, 3.3 VDC, 5 VDC, and 12 VDC. Distribution refers to how much power is supplied over each rail. A rail is a wire providing current at a particular voltage. The following table shows an example of how power distribution for a PSU might be configured. Yes, 3.3 VDC and 12 VDC. Distribution refers to how much power is supplied over each rail. A rail is a wire providing current at a particular voltage. The following table shows an example of how power distribution for a PSU might be configured. Output rail VDC. Maximum load A. Maximum output W. Plus 3.3. Note that the output of plus 3.3 V and plus 5 V has a combined limit. For a modern computer, the output rating of the plus 12 VDC rail, or rails, is the most important factor, as plus 12 VDC is the most heavily used.
Give me just a moment. I'll be taking notes on this. Okay, I'm just trying to go through a different stage of creating my notes and whatnot. So we're gonna continue on now and keep it moving.
Power supply connectors. Each PSU has a number of power connectors attached. The power connectors supply DC voltage to the motherboard and devices at 3.3 VDC, 5 VDC, and 12 VDC. Not all components use power at precisely these voltages. Voltage regulators are used to correct the voltage supplied from the PSU to the voltage required by the component. The motherboard's power port is referred to as the P1 connector. A PSU will also have a number of MOLX and or SATA device power connectors and 4/6/8 pin connectors for use with CPU and PCIe adapter card power ports. 20 pin to 24 pin motherboard adapter. The ATX PSU standard has gone through several revisions, specifying different connector form factors. In the original ATX specification, the P1 connector is 20 pin, 2x10. Wires with black insulation are ground, yellow are plus 12V, red are plus 5V, and orange are plus 3.3V. Most systems are now based on the ATX 12V version 2 specification. This defines a 24-pin, 2x12, P1 form factor to replace the 20-pin one. Some PSUs have a 20 plus 4-pin P1 adapter cable for compatibility with older motherboards with a 20-pin port. A 24-pin main motherboard power cable and port. Image copyright 123rf.com. Modular power supplies. A modular PSU has power connector cables that are detachable from the unit. Reducing the number of cables to the minimum required minimizes clutter within the chassis, improving airflow and cooling. For example, a non-modular PSU might have 4 or 5 MOLX or SATA device power connectors, but the PC might only require 2 of them. With a modular PSU, the unnecessary cables can be removed. Modular power supply with pluggable cables. Image copyright 123rf.com. Redundant power supplies. A computer system may be fitted with 2 PSUs, with one acting as a failover redundant power supply. This could also be connected to a different grid power circuit. A redundant PSU configuration requires a compatible motherboard. This configuration is more commonly found on server systems than on desktop PCs. On a server, typically each PSU plugs into a backplane and is hot swappable. This allows a faulty unit to be removed and replaced without having to open the case and without the server ever losing power. Fan cooling systems. Components in a computer system emit heat because of some degree of resistance when electrical current passes through them. Without a cooling solution, this heat will raise the temperature of each component and increase the ambient temperature inside the case. Excessive temperatures can cause the components to malfunction or even damage them. This issue particularly affects CPUs. While Intel and AMD are both focusing on making new CPU designs more thermally efficient, all CPUs require cooling to keep the temperature within an acceptable operational range. As well as the CPU, components such as memory modules and graphics adapters also require cooling solutions. Heat sinks and thermal paste. A heat sink is a block of copper or aluminum with fins. The fins expose a larger surface area to the air around the component to achieve a cooling effect by convection. The heat sink is affixed to the surface of the chip using thermal paste to ensure the best transfer of heat by eliminating small air gaps. A thermal pad performs a similar function. The pad is a compound that is solid at room temperature but softens when heated. This can be easier to apply but does not always perform as reliably. There are various mechanisms for clamping a CPU heat sink to the motherboard. There may be a retaining clip or push pins. Push pins can be released and reset for insertion by making a half turn with a screwdriver. Fans. A heat sink is a passive cooling device. Passive cooling means that it does not require extra energy, electricity, to work. To work well, a heat sink requires good airflow around the PC. It is important to try to keep cable clutter to a minimum and to ensure that spare adapter slots are covered by blanking plates. Many PCs have components that generate more heat than can be removed by passive cooling. A fan improves airflow, which helps to dissipate heat. Fans are used for the power supply and chassis exhaust points. The fan system will be designed to draw cool air from the low vents in the front of the case over the motherboard and expel warmed air from the fan positioned at the top of the back of the case. Most heat sinks are fitted with fans to improve their cooling performance. The fan's power connector must be plugged into a motherboard fan power port. Thermometer sensors are used at each fan location to set an appropriate speed and to detect whether a fan has failed. Some chassis designs incorporate a plastic shroud or system of baffles to cover the CPU and channel the flow of air. The shroud is usually attached to the case using plastic clips. Both fans and heat sinks become less effective if dust is allowed to build up. These components and any air vents should be cleaned periodically, either manually with a soft brush and/or compressed air or using a vacuum cleaner approved for use with PCs. Liquid cooling systems. PCs used for high-end gaming may generate more heat than basic thermal management can cope with. PCs used where the ambient temperature is very high may also require exceptional cooling measures. A liquid-cooled PC. Image copyright 123rf.com. A liquid-based cooling system refers to a system of pumping water around the chassis. Water is a more effective coolant than air convection, and a good pump can run more quietly than numerous fans. An open-loop, liquid-based cooling system uses the following components. The water loop/tubing and pump push the coolant added via the reservoir around the system. Water blocks and brackets are attached to each device to remove heat by convection. These are attached in a similar way to heat sink/fan assemblies and then connected to the water loop. Radiators and fans are positioned at air vents to dispel the excess heat. There are also simpler closed-loop systems that install to a single component, CPU or GPU, only. An open-loop system will usually need draining, cleaning, and refilling periodically. It is also important to keep the fans and radiators dust-free. The system should also be drained prior to moving the PC to a different location. Topic 2b. Select and install storage devices. Core 1 exam objectives covered. 3.3 Given a scenario, select and install storage devices. A PC is often much less valuable than the data that it stores and processes. This means that the reliability and performance of the devices used to store system files and user files is of critical importance. If these storage devices fail, the PC will not work, and valuable information may be lost. By identifying the types and characteristics of storage devices, you will be prepared to select, install, and maintain them to ensure a reliable computing environment for users. Mass storage devices. Non-volatile storage devices hold data when the system is powered off. These devices are also referred to as mass storage. Mass storage devices use magnetic, optical, or solid-state technology to store data. A mass storage device installed as an internal component is referred to as a fixed disk. Storage devices are produced in a number of standard widths: 5.25 inches, 3.5 inches, and 2.5 inches. The computer chassis has several drive bays to fit these form factors. Form factor bays with a 5.25-inch width are provided with removable panels so that they can be used with devices that have removable media, such as DVD drives and smart card readers. A fixed disk is typically installed to a drive bay using a caddy. You screw the drive into the caddy, then screw the caddy into the drive bay. A caddy can also allow you to fit a drive of a different size to the bay. For example, you can fit a 2.5-inch drive in a 3.5-inch bay or a 3.5-inch drive in a 5.25-inch bay by using an adapter caddy. Some caddies use rails so that you can pull the drive out without having to open the case. Computer tower with main panel removed showing an attached motherboard and areas for optical disk drives, 3.5-inch drive bays, and a power supply bay. Image copyright 123rf.com. Removable mass storage devices and removable media allow data to be archived from the PC and transferred between PCs. External storage devices are also used for backup and data transfer or to provide a drive type not available as an internal unit. A device such as an external hard drive would typically be connected to the computer via a USB or Thunderbolt port. Apart from costs, several factors impact the choice of mass storage devices. Reliability. This concerns both the risk of total device failure and the risk of partial data corruption. Reliability and expected lifespan are rated by various statistics that are different for each technology type. Performance. When comparing different types of storage technology, you need to evaluate performance for the type of data transfer that the device will use predominantly. For example, read and write performance have different characteristics. There are also differences between sequential access, reading data from the same block, as might happen when transferring a large file, and random access, reading data from different locations on the drive or transferring lots of small files. Along with the data throughput measured in MB/s or GB/s, you may need to consider the number of input-output operations per second, IPS, that can be achieved by a device for different kinds of data transfer operations. Use. Reliability and performance factors can only be properly evaluated when considering use. Examples of how storage is used include running an OS, hosting a database application, streaming audio-video data, as removable media, and for data backup and archiving. These use cases have different cost, reliability, and performance considerations. Some of the mass storage drive vendors include Seagate, Western Digital, Hitachi, Fujitsu, Toshiba, and Samsung. Rate your confidence.
How to install and configure mass storage devices? Starting out with removing a mass storage device. First thing that we have to do is make sure that we are implementing proper ESD prevention methods. We're also going to go ahead and power the computer down and remove the power cable disconnected from the back of the case, and then we're going to remove the case cover and set it to the side. We will attach our ESD wrist strap to the case, and then we're going to locate our data cable and our power cable, and we'll go ahead and remove those. Be careful not to pull on the data cable itself so you don't damage the cable. Use any tabs that might be available. We will remove the data cable, set it to the side, and then the next thing we'll do is remove the 15-pin power connector here. We'll set that to the side. Next, we're going to go ahead and we're going to remove the drive from the drive bay, and this could be a little bit different for each of your vendors. In our case here, we're going to go ahead and back this screw out just a little bit, and we will move this from the bottom position to the top. And then we're going to remove the drive from the back of the drive bay. To install a mass storage device, you need to make sure that you are prepared to work inside of the case. Have your ESD prevention techniques ready to go. Power down the computer and remove the power cable from the back of the system unit. Next, we will remove the case cover, attach our anti-static wrist strap to the case, and locate the drive that we want to put in the bay, as well as locating an empty bay. Keep in mind that your drive might need adapters or drive rails to fit in the drive bay. Pay attention to whatever the vendor recommendations are. And we'll go ahead and slide that drive into the drive bay, and then pull the latch down on the drive bay housing and tighten that down, and that will make sure that our hard drive is good and snug and not going to vibrate or move out of the case. Next thing that we have to do is we have to locate some ports on the motherboard for the data cable, and then we're going to take our data cable and we'll plug one end into the motherboard and we'll put the other one into the back of the hard drive itself. So we'll go ahead and do that real quick. We have our data cable connected to the motherboard itself, and now it's up to us to take this portion of the cable and attach it to the back of the hard drive. So let's go ahead and do that. Be careful not to damage the cable and make sure that you are lining it in the right way. If this is an IDE or SCSI drive, make sure that you're following cable select for IDE and your terminations and SCSI IDs, if you will, if it's a SCSI drive. For our serial ATA, we're going to go ahead and find our 15-pin power connector, and we will get that connected. At this point, we're going to restart the system, and we might need to boot into the system firmware in order to turn the port on the motherboard. Now we will prepare a disk for first use. If this is the first drive in the system, you'll need to install an operating system. If you're installing an additional hard drive, we're going to use disk management to prepare the new drive. We can right-click on our Windows icon in the taskbar and choose Computer Management. On the left-hand side, choose Disk Management. In the initialized disk interface, choose the appropriate partitioning style and choose OK. And in the unallocated space next to Disk 1, right-click and choose New Simple Volume Wizard and walk through the wizard with the appropriate formatting. On the New Simple Volume Wizard, review your settings and choose Finish and allow the formatting to finish. And now your drive is ready to use.
Solid-state drives. A solid-state drive, SSD, uses flash memory technology to implement persistent mass storage. Flash memory performs much better than the mechanical components used in hard disk drives, especially in terms of read performance. Risks from total failure of the device due to mechanical shock and wear are generally lower. Costs per gigabyte have fallen rapidly in the last few years. A 2.5-inch form factor solid-state drive with SATA interface. Image copyright 123rf.com. SSDs normally outperform HDDs, but there are situations where they can perform worse than HDDs, when serving multi-gigabyte file sizes, for example. Flash chips are also susceptible to a type of degradation over the course of many write operations. The drive firmware and operating system use leveling routines that evenly distribute writing on all blocks of an SSD to optimize the life of the device. The NOT and NAND flash memory used in SSDs comes in different types. Single-level cell, SLC, is more reliable and more expensive than multi-level cell types. On a typical modern desktop PC, an SSD might be installed as the computer's only internal drive or as a boot drive for use with an additional hard drive. In the second scenario, the SSD would be used to install the OS and software applications, while the HDD would be used for user data files. In terms of the communications interface, an SSD might be packaged in a 2.5-inch caddy and installed to a SATA port using the normal SATA data and power connectors. Alternatively, the mSATA form factor allows an SSD packaged as an adapter card to be plugged into a combined data and power port on the motherboard. With both form factors, the main drawback is that the 600 MB per second SATA interface can be a bottleneck to the best performing SSDs, which can achieve transfer rates of up to 6.7 GB per second. mSATA SSD form factor. Image copyright 123rf.com. Consequently, modern SSDs often use the PCI Express (PCIe) bus directly. Where SATA uses the Advanced Host Controller Interface (HCI) logical interface to communicate with the bus, PCIe-based SSDs use the Non-Volatile Memory Host Controller Interface Specification (NVMe-HCI) or NVMe Express (NVMe). An NVMe SSD can either be packaged for installation to a PCIe slot as an expansion card or to an M.2 slot. The M.2 adapter card form factor is considerably smaller than a PCIe adapter and oriented horizontally rather than vertically, so the interface is often used on laptops as well as PC motherboards. M.2 supplies power over the bus, so there is no need for a separate power cable. M.2 adapters can be different widths and lengths, so you should check that any given adapter will fit on your motherboard. Labels indicate the adapter sizes supported. For example, an M.2 2280 adapter is 22 mm wide and 80 mm long. M.2 is a physical form factor. You can obtain M.2 SSDs that use the SATA/HCI bus. These will typically not perform as well as NVMe-based M.2 SSDs. On the motherboard, an M.2 socket may be able to support both types of drive or only one. Check the documentation. SATA interface SSDs are usually B-keyed, 2-lane PCIe SSDs are usually B/M keyed, and 4-lane SSDs are usually M keyed. SSDs are vulnerable to electrostatic discharge, ESD. Always take anti-ESD precautions when handling and storing these devices.
Okay, so just to say it again, I do take notes after each reading, so just, I guess, skip ahead for those who will be watching it afterwards, just to let y'all know.
Hard disk drives. A hard disk drive, HDD, stores data on metal or glass platters that are coated with a magnetic substance. The top and bottom of each platter is accessed by its own read/write head, moved by an actuator mechanism. The platters are mounted on a spindle and spun at high speed. Each side of each platter is divided into circular tracks, and a track contains several sectors, each with a capacity of 512 bytes. This low-level formatting is also referred to as the drive geometry. HDD with drive circuitry and casing removed showing 1. Platters, 2. Spindle, 3. Read/write heads, 4. Actuator. Image by CompTIA at 123rf.com. This technology means that the performance of an HDD is determined by the speed at which the disks spin, measured in revolutions per minute (RPM). High-performance drives are rated at 15,000 or 10,000 RPM. Average performance is 7,200 or 5,400 RPM. RPM is one factor determining access time, measured in milliseconds. Access time is a multimetric timeframe that includes both access and seek time and encompasses the total time for a computer to read/write required data. Whereas access time is the delay as the read/write head locates a particular track position, seek time is the time it takes to move from one point to the point in which the data resides. A high-performance drive will have an access time below 3 milliseconds. A typical drive might have an access time of around 6 milliseconds. The internal transfer rate, or data or disk transfer rate, of a drive is a measure of how fast read/write operations are performed on the disk platters. A 15K drive should support an internal transfer rate of up to about 180 megabytes per second, while 7.2K drives will be around 110 megabytes per second. Most HDDs use a SATA interface, though you may come across legacy devices using EID/PATA or SCSI interfaces. There are two main form factors for HDDs. The mainstream type used in desktop PCs are 3.5-inch units. The 2.5-inch form factor is used for laptops and as portable external drives. Devices with 2.5-inch form factors can also vary in height, with 15 mm, 9.5 mm, 7 mm, and 5 mm form factors available. Redundant array of independent disks. Whether it is the system files required to run the OS or data files generated by users, an HDD or SSD stores critical data. If a boot drive fails, the system will crash. If a data drive fails, users will lose access to files and there may be permanent data loss if those files have not been backed up. To mitigate these risks, the disks that underpin the mass storage system can be provisioned as a redundant array of independent disks, RAID. Redundancy sacrifices some disk capacity but provides fault tolerance. To the OS, the RAID array appears as a single storage resource, or volume, and can be partitioned and formatted like any other drive. RAID can also be said to stand for Redundant Array of Inexpensive Disks, and the D can also stand for Devices. A RAID level represents a drive configuration with a given type of fault tolerance. Basic RAID levels are numbered from 0 to 6. There are also nested RAID solutions, such as RAID 10, RAID 1 plus RAID 0. RAID can be implemented using features of the operating system, referred to as software RAID. Hardware RAID uses a dedicated controller, installed as an adapter card. The RAID disks are connected to SATA ports on the RAID controller adapter card, rather than to the motherboard. As another option, some motherboards implement integrated RAID functionality as part of the chipset. Hardware solutions are principally differentiated by their support for a range of RAID levels. Entry-level controllers might support only RAID 0 or RAID 1, whereas mid-level controllers might add support for RAID 5 and RAID 10. In addition, hardware RAID is often able to hot swap a damaged disk. Hot swap means that the failed device can be replaced without shutting down the operating system. Configuring a volume using RAID controller firmware. RAID 0 and RAID 1. When implementing RAID, it is important to select the appropriate RAID level. The factors influencing this decision include the required level of fault tolerance, read/write performance characteristics, required capacity, and cost. When building a RAID array, all the disks should normally be identical in terms of capacity, and ideally in terms of type and performance. If disks are different sizes, the size of the smallest disk in the array determines the maximum amount of space that can be used on the larger drives. RAID 0, striping without parity. Disk striping divides data into blocks and spreads the blocks in a fixed order among all the disks in the array. This improves performance as multiple disks are available to service requests in parallel. RAID 0 requires at least 2 disks. The logical volume size is the sum of the drives multiplied by the smallest capacity physical disk in the array. However, RAID 0 provides no redundancy at all. If any physical disk in the array fails, the whole logical volume will fail, causing the computer to crash and requiring data to be recovered from backup. Consequently, RAID 0 only has specialist uses, typically as some type of non-critical cache store. RAID 0, striping, data is spread across the array. Image copyright 123rf.com. RAID 1 mirroring. RAID 1 is a mirrored drive configuration using 2 disks. Each write operation is duplicated on the second disk in the set, introducing a small performance overhead. A read operation can use either disk, boosting performance somewhat. This strategy is the simplest way of protecting a single disk against failure. If one disk fails, the other takes over. There is little impact on performance during this, so availability remains good, but the failed disk should be replaced as quickly as possible as there is no longer any redundancy. When the disk is replaced, it must be populated with data from the other disk. Performance while rebuilding is reduced, though RAID 1 is better than other levels in that respect, and the rebuilding process is generally shorter than for parity-based RAID. RAID 1 mirroring. Data is written to both disks simultaneously. Image copyright 123rf.com. In terms of cost per gigabyte, disk mirroring is more expensive than other forms of fault tolerance because disk space utilization is only 50%. RAID 5 and RAID 10. RAID 5 and RAID 10 have performance, disk utilization, and fault tolerance characteristics that can make them better choices than basic mirroring. RAID 5, striping with distributed parity. RAID 5 uses striping, like RAID 0, but with distributed parity. Distributed parity means that error correction information is spread across all the disks in the array. The data and parity information are managed so that the two are always on different disks. If a single disk fails, enough information is spread across the remaining disks to allow the data to be reconstructed. Striped sets with parity offer the best performance for read operations. However, when a disk has failed, the read performance is degraded by the need to recover the data using the parity information. Also, all normal write operations suffer reduced performance due to the parity calculation. RAID 5, striping with parity. Image copyright 123rf.com. RAID 5 requires a minimum of 3 drives but can be configured with more. This allows more flexibility in determining the overall capacity of the array than is possible with RAID 1. A hard, maximum number of devices is set by the controller or OS support, but the number of drives used is more likely to be determined by practicalities such as cost and risk. Adding more disks increases the chance of failure. If more than one disk fails, the volume will be unavailable. The level of fault tolerance and available disk space is inverse. As you add disks to the set, fault tolerance decreases, but usable disk space increases. If you configure a RAID 5 set using 3 disks, a third of each disk is set aside for parity. If 4 are used, 1/4 is reserved on each disk. Using a 380GB disk configuration, you would have a 160GB usable volume. RAID 10 Stripe of mirrors. A nested RAID configuration combines features of 2 basic RAID levels. RAID 10 is a logical striped volume, RAID 0, configured with 2 mirrored arrays, RAID 1. This configuration offers excellent fault tolerance, as 1 disk in each mirror can fail, and the volume will still be available. RAID 10, either disk in each of the subvolumes can fail without bringing down the main volume. Image copyright 123rf.com. This configuration requires at least 4 disks, and there must be an even number of disks. It carries the same 50% disk overhead as mirroring. Removable storage drives. Removable storage can refer either to a storage device that can be moved from computer to computer without having to open the case, or to storage media that is removable from its drive. Drive enclosures. HDDs and SSDs can be provisioned as removable storage in an enclosure. The enclosure provides a data interface, USB, Thunderbolt, or eSATA, a power connector, if necessary, and protection for the disk. External storage device. Image copyright 123rf.com. Some enclosures can be connected directly to a network rather than to a PC. This is referred to as network attached storage (NAS). Advanced enclosures can host multiple disk units configured as a RAID array. Flash drives and memory cards. The flash memory underpinning SSDs can also be provisioned in the flash drive and memory card form factors. A flash drive, also called a USB drive, thumb drive, or pen drive, is simply a flash memory board with a USB connector and protective cover. This type of drive plugs into any spare USB port. USB thumb drive, left, and SD memory card, right. Image copyright 123rf.com. The memory card form factor is used in consumer digital imaging products, such as digital still and video cameras, and to expand smartphone and tablet storage. A PC can be fitted with a memory card reader device. These are usually designed to fit in a front-facing drive bay. The reader then needs to be connected to a USB controller. Most motherboards have at least one spare USB header for making internal connections. Alternatively, the reader may come with an expansion card. Multicard reader. Image copyright 123rf.com. There are several proprietary types of memory card, each of which also has different sizes and performance ratings. Most memory card readers work with multiple card types. As an example, Secure Digital (SD) cards are available in 3 capacity variants. The original SD cards have a 2 GB maximum capacity, whereas Secure Digital High Capacity (SDHC) is up to 32 GB and SDXC is up to 2 TB. There are also 4 speed variants. The original specification is up to 25 MB per second. UHS allows up to 108 MB per second. UHS 2 is rated at up to 156 MB per second full duplex or 3. There are several proprietary types of memory card, each of which also has different sizes and performance ratings. Most memory card readers work with multiple card types. As an example, Secure Digital (SD) cards are available in 3 capacity variants. The original SD cards have a 2 GB maximum capacity, whereas Secure Digital High Capacity (SDHC) is up to 32 GB and SDXC is up to 2 TB. There are also 4 speed variants. The original specification is up to 25 MB per second. UHS allows up to 108 MB per second. UHS 2 is rated at up to 156 MB per second full duplex or 312 MB per second half duplex, while UHS 3 specifies 2 full duplex rates of 312 MB per second, FD312, and 624 MB per second, FD624. Smaller form factor microSD, microSDHC, and microSDXC cards are also available. The smaller form factors can be used with regular size readers using a caddy to hold the card.
Okay, y'all. ADHD getting to me. I'm gonna take a small break. I'm gonna stop the stream and come back.